Today is January 12th, 2000, and I, Sandra Thurlow, will be interviewing Jim McMahon. Jim, I'd like you to tell me how you came here and a little of your background, your personal background.
As a young man, I lived in the state of New Jersey, and after I got out of the military, a friend of mine was moving to Stewart, and three of us decided we would come, that living in Florida sounded quite nice. So I moved, and I had planned on settling in the Cape Canaveral area, and I visited Stewart, and within one day I was employed, and I've just been here ever since. It's a wonderful place, and this is what I call home.
What year was that?
That was 1958.
And so who hired you, and how did that happen?
When I first came to town, I was employed by Krause & Crane Electric, and I did residential type work and rebuilding electric motors and pumps and things of that nature. But as a young man, I had seen a lot of problems with youth not having constructive things to do. So through the Stewart JCs, I was working with 4 youth organizations and trying to plan activities for youngsters. From that, an opening became available in the city of Stewart, and I was approached about becoming director of what was then called the Stewart Civic Center on Flagler Avenue. And so I accepted that, and I went to work for the city of Stewart as the director of the Civic Center in the Recreation Department.
Who hired you? Who approached you?
I was approached by Commissioner Ed Higbee, but the actual hiring was done by Joe Crowder, who was the city manager. But Mr. Higbee was a commissioner, and he knew a friend of mine, Bob Gottran. And Bob Gottran was at that time the owner of Higbee Electric. He had purchased it from Mr. Higbee, and I had been working through the JCs, and also Bob was in the JCs. And Joe Crankshaw, who worked for the Stewart News at that time, he was aware of some of the things that I was doing, and somehow or another all 3 of them were talking about the Recreation Department, and my name was mentioned. And from that, of course, Mr. Crowder being the official who was hired as the manager actually did the hiring.
Were you single at the time, or?
Yes, I was single. And
were there many single men in JCs?
At that time, there were quite a few, yes. I looked forward to getting into it. I was the youngest JC at the time, and then you had to be 21, and when on my 21st birthday, I said I want to join, and I joined the JCs.
So you were really young when you came here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and so let's go. When were you born?
1937, October 4th.
Okay, and you were 18 when you came, or 20?
No, I was right around 20 years of age.
20.
Yeah, I was between.
I should have been able to do that.
Yeah.
And you were single. Okay, and could you name some of the other people in JCs at the time?
Cotton Rogers, Bob Gottran, a little later on, Joe Willett.
Okay, but it was quite active.
Yes, it was.
Time. Where did you
Mallory
meet?
Johnson,
Where did you meet?
At that time, it was at the lighthouse over the Roosevelt Bridge, and the owner of the lighthouse, and I can't think of his name right now, was in the JCs, so we met in their meeting room. Bishop was another man. He was the administrator of the hospital. I'm pretty sure it was Evans Crary Sr.
You really seen a lot of changes in this town.
Yes, ma'am.
You were that active that young. Okay, now tell me what you were faced with when you went to the rec center.
Well, at that particular time, there was just a crowd of rough boys. It was not the type of thing that you see nowadays where people were robbing people or beating them over the head or using drugs, but they would drink on the weekends and they would just, race around with their automobiles. They would do a lot of foolish things, and I would say boy things that were not right, but they were not malicious. And so we started off to try to get a spirit of feeling that the building was theirs. I asked the commission if I could have permission to rename it the Stewart Youth Center, with the thought in mind that it would in no way change the operation of the facility, noting that YMCAs and YWCAs let people of all faiths in at that time. They would let the women into the men's and so forth, and so it was just to give the young people an identity. And so among our first projects was to completely clean up and repaint the inside of the building. One thing I do remember was we lowered the flagpole, and Bunny Abbott was with the Stewart News, and he came down to take a picture, and he wanted the young people to pose similar to the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima. So he wanted to have them in a pose similar to that when they raised it. Well, there were quite a few rough boys that were helping put the flag back up, pole back up, and people said, "Why did you put their picture in the newspaper?" I said, "Well, because they're the ones who painted the building and painted the pole, and are you happy to see them doing that rather than some of the other things that you were doing?" So from that we went forward. We tried different things. We had what we called Jamboree Days, where the young people, at that time the high school was on 4th Street, which is now East Ocean Boulevard, and they would walk over, and we had our own records, and with a ticket you could select 3 records that we would play your requests. And we put out a potato chip package, and alongside of it was a little tube that I had gotten from one of the news media people. And it used to be that if you bought a newspaper, you'd put a dime or whatever the paper was, a quarter maybe on the weekend or something, into this tube. So I asked him if I could have one of those tubes, and I put in an honor system for potato chips, which everyone laughed at and said, "You won't have any chips by the end of the day." Well, much to everyone's surprise, and I was very happy, we came up short once in a while, and sometimes we'd come up with too much, but the honor system worked pretty good. And then our young people, I thought, well, we ought to be doing something for the girls, so we ought to have baking classes. So I ran down and I bought mixes that were as instant as they could be at that time, and I read the directions, and everybody thought I was Chef Boyardee or something. We were baking cookies, and then we were selling them to the boys. Well, the girls couldn't make the cookies fast enough till the boys ate them, and they wanted to go on to bigger and better, and that really was not my forte at all. They quickly found out that if I couldn't read the directions ahead of time, we couldn't do it. So I approached the Junior Women's Club of Stewart, and the Junior Women's Club came in and they helped the ladies with all kinds of programs: how to make fancy sandwiches for parties, how to bake, how to groom themselves, how to walk properly, and they put on a lot of excellent programs over the years for the young people. And in the beginning, I had sent out letters to all of the civic organizations and inviting them to participate and be part of the department and to bring us ideas, and also it was sent out to the various churches in the area. The group that held in there the longest with us, while everyone would help when we asked, the Junior Women's Club of Stewart, every single year until they went out of existence, did a program for the young ladies and worked with us. They were also instrumental in buying all new curtains for the recreation center, and also helping spearhead the building expansion of room number 4. And they received considerable help from the Jeffersons on that as well. So the Junior Women's Club did a lot with us, as well as other organizations, but they were especially good with the young ladies. And we just can
explain room number 4.
It is the room that is facing, it's separate from the rest of the building, and it faces the Stewart Feed Store. So if you used US 1 for north and south, it's very difficult because actually Colorado Avenue is north and south. So if you use directions, everybody's lost. But if you would use Flagler Avenue, it would be going in the direction of City Hall or the feed store, and it's the separate building to itself.
Can you remember that year?
No, years, I'm going to be real hard on giving you years.
But that you're talking about Peter and Joan Jefferson.
That is correct, and they
so
coordinated.
So long ago, I
right.
can vaguely remember.
Right, and they coordinated, as I said, to the Junior Women's Club. They were the ones actually headed it up, but Peter drew the plans, and Joan was quite helpful in, helping them talk to contractors and things of that nature.
Who paid for it?
It was paid for the most part, through donations. And near the end, the city did put some money into it. I can tell you that Ed Glasscock was the city manager at that time. But they did all sorts of things. They asked contractors to help donate money. They also sold blocks out back for $100, and you would put your name on the block, and if you go behind the building, they're still there on the patio, and that's what they made the patio out of, these squares. It was just an overall community effort.
That's great.
And that's one of the things.
Now, I know you began with just the white children. Can you remember when? Did it start just when we integrated the schools that you?
No, we were actually, the city of Stewart had a dual program. It was segregated when I came with the city, but we had a lady by the name of Edretha Mackey, and she had a small center on East 10th Street. And next to it was an old tennis court. It was a concrete type tennis court. I might say that the tennis courts in downtown were deplorable too, so I mean it was not unusual. But when I came, I went over and introduced myself, and even though I had nothing officially to do with the building, I always kept in touch with her and keeping the pool sticks in shape and helping buy things. And whenever I would present something to, at that time, Mr. Crowder to purchase, we would purchase a similar item for the 10th Street Center when it, for instance, recovering pool tables or things of that nature. We did them both at the same time. The facilities, though, at that time, they were segregated.
And I assume that the youth center now was a little better than the 10th Street.
It was larger. The building originally was a USO for the military, and through changing of hands and so forth, it became city property. So the city did not have to build the building. The city, when I came to work for it, was, so to speak, almost living hand to mouth. I went to work for the city for $70 a week, which was actually a $10 decrease from the job I had. I wanted to get into working with young people, But we just didn't have anything. A little side issue that would be funny, it has nothing to do with recreation, but just to let you see the city, was that I saw one of our city trucks going down the road, and it had dual wheels in the back, and it had two tires. And the two tires held the older ones off the ground, so they didn't touch the ground. And I went to the superintendent and I said, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I said, why? Why did they do that? And he said, well, we could only afford two tires for the truck. He said, and when we go out to the dump and we sink down in the sand, the other two take over and can help us pull through. I don't think many people have seen a city that was struggling like that.
Isn't that something? So, in the city, you had the city manager, who was Mr. Crowder.
That's correct.
Okay, and the commission. Who else was there? You had a clerk.
We had Mrs. McCrary was the city clerk. When I first came, Ben Hodap was the street superintendent. And most everything came out of that department at that time. Any kind of construction, it was a small city, or anything that had to be done, they would call up the sanitation department, and the people would do it, from trying to paint lines for parking automobiles, to if something went wrong at the building. There was Louis Gray was a maintenance man, and he just went wherever they sent him. And many things were done through community effort. In other words, if you wanted something or needed something, you would make a plea to a civic organization, and they would help. An example being the Stewart Tourist Club, which back then had meetings that exceeded 400 people. And when we needed tables, they were willing to purchase the materials, and then, of course, Louis Gray, the maintenance man, made the tables. And just things went on like that. As I say, our furniture, which was World War II vintage, the stuffed cushions that went with were just worn out, and they looked terrible. And I remember the ladies from the garden club said they would put cushions on it, and they were very concerned because it was going to cost almost $1,800 to do that. And they were concerned, would it last? Would the young people take care of it? And we're very delighted to say that that went for years and years and years, and the cushions were still there. So the ladies did that sort of thing, and it just went on like that. So many things. When we needed heaters, one of the clubs gave half the money, and the city gave the other half to buy kerosene heaters to heat the building back then. And in the summertime, it was kind of warm, and the Duplicate Bridge Club bought the fans secondhand in Palm Beach County. Some big estate took these paddle fans down, and they were purchased, and we installed them. The city did it. I did some of the electrical work on it myself, and we did it. And that's the way the community was. And I think that has been, over the years, one of the things that I have been very, very proud of with our city, is that when something had to be done, they come together. I can remember, and this is not recreation oriented, although they used our building, was that when kidney machines first came out, they were given to individuals. If you didn't have a kidney machine, you didn't live. And if you couldn't prove to them that you could maintain, which was quite expensive, the machine, and get whatever chemicals and all were necessary, you were not put high on the list. And our community came together, and there was a man by the name of Paul Budd that needed a machine. And they had a big festival, and fish fry, and did everything all around the recreation building, and raised the money, and had enough to keep that machine going. And that's the kind of thing that I've seen over and over again in Stewart.
You've mentioned the tourist club and the duplicate bridge and the youth. Other things that went on at the rec center while you were there.
We had, at that time, Stewart was really the main hub for everything. So at the Flagler facility, which went by different names, it started off the Civic Center, it went to the Stewart Youth Center, and it's the Stewart Recreation Center is the present name, and each of them, it was felt, improved the image to the public. The actual operation didn't change, but we had all of the Cub Scout and Boy Scout organizations there. The Junior Conservation Club met there. We had craft classes for ladies of all type, whether it be pine needle, it was scrapped craft, it was knitting, crocheting, you name it, all sorts of things. People would come in the beginning. Television, the reception was not all that good. It came out of Miami and West Palm Beach, and if you didn't have a very good antenna, you didn't get it. So just having people come in and watch ball games and sporting events and sit in the front and do that, that was something that the young people and old people themselves liked to do. And over the years, with all of the different types of organizations, like I could go on and on. Anglers Club was there. It's just difficult now.
I can see the Junior Orange Bowl contest was there.
It was originated,
and then
right.
Summer camp.
Summer camp we had all the time. And it just went on. But one of the things that I think made us a little bit unique, and it was one of the things that while I was there and then later became director, I didn't want to lose, was I did not believe isolating people by age was a good idea. Now, I believed in keeping them separate in rooms so they wouldn't drive one another crazy, but all of the common areas were shared by all ages, so that if people were of ages of grandparents, they came and they saw the young people doing things in other areas. Likewise, the younger people saw what the older people were doing. Now, along with this building, of course, there was the one on East 10th Street, and while it was a smaller building, they had all sorts of table games over there. We eventually put basketball on the outside for them. They had pocket billiards. They had summer camp program. And for instance, speaking of working with organizations, the Club 400 was a ladies group, and came Easter time, we just didn't have very much money, so we went to different clubs and organizations, and they were one of them, and they would purchase eggs so that we could have an Easter egg hunt for the black children. And then we would color the eggs.
Was the Club 400 Afro-American?
Yes, it was all black ladies, and they were in the community, and I went to them and told them I would like to do something for the youngsters at Easter, and would they be able to help us buy the eggs? So they bought us the eggs, and then I had...
So after integration, you were in charge of 10th Street, too?
That came a while later. It came when Mr. Glasscock first became the city manager. He did not realize that my title only was for the one building, because I used to watch over the other one all the time, and he came to me about a budget and so forth, and I told him, well, I had never done it that way because I was only in charge of that building. And at that time, the city was in very desperate straits. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, he said, I can give you the title. He says, I can't give you a raise and I can't give you any money. Do you want to do it? And I said, yes. I said, I'm already doing it. So we did that. And as I say, there were a number of black programs that we had put on, and we asked the community for help. And then integration came along. Of course, with that, we had, along with that facility, we had a number of parks, but we also had the shuffleboard building, which predominantly, at that time, and even to this day, as far as the courts are concerned, were retired people. We had 2 clay courts for tennis, which were in deplorable condition on Stitman Boulevard, and 1 concrete one at the 10th Street Center. And we had 2 baseball diamonds. And a group of men.
So Stitman, are you talking about really right at Memorial Park still?
That is correct, yes.
Stitman, that road. Okay.
Stitman used to go through from Georgia Avenue at the middle school over to Flagler. And only with the recent renovations of the ballpark was that road divided up so that you can't go all the way through. But the ballparks themselves, everything, what you have to realize is it was a small community, and volunteerism was the name of the game. And while I was the paid employee for the recreation department, you can imagine one person can't do very much of anything. And eventually the department was formed when Mr. Glasscock came around, and I was given the oldest employees in the city to work for me, because they felt like if they were indoors it was a little easier on them. Back then there was no retirement, there was nothing, so what the city would do was with these older gentlemen, and one man, for instance, had worked for the city 40 years, Mr. Clark, Tom Clark. And so long as he was physically able to come in and do some kind of work, the city was going to allow him.
So it's almost like welfare, but you worked.
It was... Yeah, I wouldn't exactly say it was welfare. They were doing their job, but they eased them into work that was less strenuous. For instance, sweeping and cleaning the buildings was like a lot easier than trying to pick up garbage cans or pick up rubbish along the road or paint out in the hot sun. So they were actually doing their job. It was just an easier type of employment for them.
And this Mr. Thompson?
Tom Clark.
Tom Clark, okay.
Yes.
What had he done before?
He had worked through which at that time was sanitation, did everything. So he was in the sanitation department.
He was it?
He was one of the employees over there. And then there was Tom Newman, who worked at the Recreation Center and City Hall. And I can't think of the other name, Westerfield, I think it was. I'm not positive, but he worked at the ball diamonds and took care of those. And because almost everything that went on in the county went on in Stewart, we were in need of additional fields. And Cal Montgomery headed up a group of people, along with the baseball coaches and Little League coaches, and they came to the city about building a new set of bleachers at Sailfish Ballpark. And they also wanted to put 2 additional fields on the outside of the concrete fence. Now, Sailfish was originally built and had a wonderful set of lights. It was for the Miami Marlins. And they played here. And unfortunately, the lights had not been used at all, and I came along, and I was young and a little crazy, and there were 70-foot poles, and they weren't working, and we didn't have the money to have the lights fixed. And I asked the city manager, I said, well, if I change the lights, will you buy the light bulbs for us? And he said yes to that. So I went over to Mr. Higbee, who was in the electrical business, and I borrowed a safety belt, which he said, it hasn't been used in a long time, and I don't know whether it's good. Now, if you're going to hang upside down from a pole 70 feet, that's not the thing you want to hear. So I took the belt in one hand, and I held on at all times and went up, and we got the lights working well enough to play night ball, which hadn't been done in quite a few years.
I assume you weren't a single man risking your life at this point.
No, I was a little older, but I was still probably a little crazy.
No, but you had children, and right?
No, that was
You
early
still
on.
very early.
It was
Okay.
early on, so at that point I may not have had children yet, but it was
A life threat.
yeah, it was it was fun. Well, Whitfield, the funny part of it was that the man who worked with me, the elderly man, his name, we called him Whitfield, and I can't think of his regular name. His job was to point out which ones to change and send the light bulbs up. Well, he kept looking at the ground, and I hollered, Whitfield, Whitfield. So finally I came off the pole. I said, you have to look up. I said, I can't hear you when you're looking at the ground. He said, well, I can't do that. I said, why is that? He says, when the clouds were going by, he felt like he was moving and he would fall down. So I told him, I said, lay down on the ground and you'll know you can't fall. So he would lay down and holler. So we had a lot of fun in the old days. But at any rate, Mr.
You got him to work?
Oh, yes, oh, yeah, we worked.
I mean, the lights,
yes,
worked?
we got them to work. We didn't get them 100%, but there were so many lights because it was the Marlins. I remember the number. There was 144 1,500-watt lamps on that. You could probably get a suntan. So even though we couldn't get all of them working, there was more than enough to light up the fields for nighttime ball.
Do you know the story about the Marlins coming and how they happened to come here? And
no, unfortunately, they had left, and that's why the field was not maintained. But the Marlins, which was at that time was a semi-pro team, played here. But we had men's baseball here, and we had some wonderful players, Judge Harris Lowry and Charlie Hall. The stories that I have been told is that when they played baseball, they would tell Casa Lumber Company so they could park their truck underneath the shed, because these men hit the ball so far that it would bounce outside the ballpark, and sometimes on a hop would go and hit the trucks and it would break their windshields. So they would tell them when they were having ball games so that they would put the trucks inside under the shed. But at any rate, Mr. Montgomery and all of the volunteers from the different organizations put up a new set of bleachers and rebuilt field number 1 and 2, and then went on the outside and put up 2 smaller fields. One was a Little League size field and also for girls softball, and the other one was a T-ball type field. So then we went from 2 to 4 ball fields. And many things were done. The clay courts, no one was playing on the clay courts, and I tried getting them going, and I talked to different people, and it was you had to water them and roll them, and we did that and got them in shape to where people could play a little bit, but the tapes were getting old, and finally we were able to budget to have those 2 courts resurfaced.
Tennis courts in the Hospital Pond area, were they playable?
No, when I came to the city, that was just a very rundown, very deplorable corner. I don't know what happened along the line, how things slipped. I don't know whether private individuals, which back then a lot of those things were clubs and organizations, would get together and they didn't have an interest, and then the city didn't follow through. Some of the people that I know of, which during the wartime was Mrs. Kruger was involved in it, and Mrs. Bartlett, from what I understand, helped out some at the recreation center. And then that was taken over after that by a gentleman called Pop Casabloom. And after Pop Casabloom was a Mrs. Gale. And Mrs. Dave Gale, and she was called Diane. She went to work at the Stuart News. And then somewhere in between, and I'm not sure whether it was before or after, was Tom Schreckengoss. And he was there for a while. And then eventually I came along. And during that period of time, as I say, it was like, you know, people probably were to be just at the recreation center. And even though that's what I was hired for, I saw that the other things needed to be done, and I was going out and doing it, but it was not anything official, and it was every time I would see something, I would have to go into try and get money for that particular one because I didn't budget for that, and it was all.
Did you have to get an okay when you had an idea, or did you have to go to the city manager, or?
Any of the clubs and organizations and things that I did at the recreation center, I was pretty well left to my own to do that. But when I went out into other areas, like when I went over to 10th Street, or if I went to the Ball Diamonds or the Shuffleboard Court, or any place that was not actually my responsibility, I would tell the manager that had come to my attention, that there was something needed to be done, whatever it is. Did he feel we could do it? Occasionally he'd say yes, and then other times he'd say, no, we don't have the funds now. You know, you have to wait and look at budget when it comes around, if we can do that. With the passing of Mr. Crowder, that's when I got authority to do things through a glass cock. And of course then it was through the budget procedure, and that was presented to the commission. You would tell them what your ideas were, and it went, you know, forward from there.
Did Mr. Glascott pay more attention than Mr. Crowder? Was it more laissez-faire with Bob Crowder?
I think what it was is that the community was starting to grow more, and it's like anything. If you have someone that's organizing and working with volunteers, you can bring more to the forefront. In other words, like if you had the baseball people and they were saying they were needing more equipment or more space or whatever it is, and someone could say, you know, the city is not going to be able to afford that for quite a while. Maybe we can get volunteers to do things, and you would just, you know, kind of be the spark to get things going. Now, to be truthful, I did not. I was not the one who got things going for the first renovation of the ballpark. But naturally, people did come to me and talk to me and everything, but there was a very dedicated group of volunteers that saw that need, and they were the ones who started to present it and go to the city.
Cal Montgomery.
Montgomery and that group, yes. There were a number of people. The reason why I remember Cal's name more so was that he was the one who was drawing the plans and so forth, and that's were the things that I was looking at with him. But there were just literally, you know, dozens and dozens of people that were out there working.
Like the parks, were you responsible for the parks themselves?
Well, here again, what we had is eventually, as things started to break away, they had a parks department, which was Mr. Ambler, and the cemetery. So Mr. Ambler had those two. I had the recreational facilities, and because it was necessary for me to have things in order, I did a certain amount of parks work if it was a recreational type. Example being Memorial Park, he took care of all the grounds. But the Ball Diamonds, because I had to have the fields cut and dragged and so forth for ball games, I had at that time started getting some people to be able to do that, so that if someone was booking a ball game, we could coordinate all maintenance on those facilities ourselves. Now, as time went by and Mr. Ambler retired, then Robert Hall came along, and he had it. He took over the position that Mr. Ambler had, and then as time went by further, and Robert Hall left, then Recreation and Parks was put together, and Streets and Cemetery went together. And then eventually, the cemetery was sold off to private enterprise. So that was kind of the progression. When I left the city, I was director of recreation and parks.
When they sold the cemetery, it seems like they sold it to ACOP first, did they? Can you remember?
They sold it, I can't tell you the year.
But I mean, it's just too much to maintain, wasn't it? Or
well, again, it's how much of a business approach. Now, this is my feelings towards it. Mr. Ambler, while he was still with the city, he was trying to get them to bring mausoleums in, and he had gotten information on it. And Mr. Hall had done the same. Also, the fact that the lots sold at very reasonable amounts of money in comparison, the two. So what it really needed was someone to be able to bring in the mausoleums, and the city did not seem to want to do that because the superintendents tried bringing that forward, and the ideas were not accepted. And also for the city to try increasing the price of the lots, that was also something they didn't want to do. By turning it over to private enterprise, that was the first thing they did. They immediately put a mausoleum in. They were coordinating packages where they could sell a funeral and a plot with it and everything else, and it just took on a different approach. I think the city could have done it if they wanted, but they felt that just sending it off to private enterprise rather than be in the cemetery business was what they wanted to do.
Even with the school system, even the buses, I mean, just
yes.
Changing. So. Okay, can you go through the property that you were aware that the city owned?
Sure. First of all, when I came to the city, I was at the recreation, which was the Stewart Youth Center, Stewart Civic Center, three names, the same building, which is next to the Stewart Feed Store on Flagler. The city had the piece of property there, and then it went along the river down to the building that the Coast Guard Auxiliary met in. It's a city-owned building, but the property line actually went right along the eave of the building. And the Ashleys family, many years back, had sold the property from the Coast Guard Auxiliary and that dirt road that ran down through there up to the railroad tracks. They sold it to the railroad with the caveat that if they did not use it for railroad purposes, that they would be given first offer on purchasing the land back. Now, all the details of it I don't know, but most people thought that the park was that far out, myself included, until it was surveyed. The dirt road that was there was not the dividing line. That was actually on FEC property. And we actually had installed a piece of equipment off of our property, not knowing where the property line was. Then as years went by, the Blakesley family owned two lots that were between the recreation center and the Stewart Feed Store. And those two lots were purchased by the city. So then they owned those two lots there. We had a park that had nothing. It was just there. It was land. And that was Shepherd Park, which is located West Ocean Boulevard, which was also known as 4th Street, and U.S. Highway number 1. And there was literally nothing there. You just went in. Eventually we got a few picnic tables and so forth. In later years it was developed with funds from the state of Florida, what they call the FERDAP program, and the city put money in it as well. The small piece of property, which was called Church Street Park, it had other names prior to that, but it was at the end of Church Street at the railroad tracks. That was in the East Stewart area. it was overrun with sand spurs, as all our parks were. And there were some pieces of playground equipment that went into that park. Now, I don't know who purchased the equipment for that, but I do know that the JCETs had purchased the equipment on the end of Flagler before I became the director. And that equipment was the same type. So whether they did it for both parks, I don't know, but it was exactly the same equipment. The company was American, and there was no mistaking their equipment. It was good, rugged, heavy equipment. Then there was, of course, 10th Street, and it had a small recreation building on it, and it had the concrete court next to it, which was used more for basketball than it was for tennis, but it was there. Then on...
Okay, which side of 10th Street?
This is where the present...
The police station side?
No, that's 7th. 10th Street is 3 more blocks over.
Okay, but where the Boys and Girls Club is?
It's called the Stewart Civic Center. It's the city recreation facility.
Okay.
And they may be one of the groups that are meeting there, but it is the city facility. And the smaller building over there was the center. The new one was built next to it, but that was the original center. Yes, it's still there.
Okay, and it was built from scratch.
It was built from scratch, yes.
Hand-me-down.
No. Then Dixie Lane, which is now Housing Authority property, there was a ball field, football and baseball field that were used by black people. When the Housing Authority was being developed, there was a deal made that they would let that land be used to build houses, providing they would take over the recreation area and put in some nice equipment and so forth. And this arrangement was made with the city. They never did fulfill the commitment because they didn't have the money. They did modernization to the building's electric system, and they put a ceiling and some lights in, and they did put some recreation equipment in, but they were supposed to, replace the ball diamonds and everything else. The facilities that you see over there now were done mostly through the city and through a program with the federal government, where they came in and gave assistance with it. It was a program that I had applied for and was able to get.
Now, the Housing Authority, isn't that federal too? I mean, I don't understand,
yes,
but they didn't have money.
They did not have, when they built the facilities, they did not have the money to do the things with recreation that they thought they were going to be able to do. So they were supposed to be the ones to install the ball diamonds or the ball diamond and the lights and things of that nature.
So we must have owned that property for a long time, maybe when it was platted way back. I mean,
the property itself has been owned by the city for years because it was the original well field for the city water system.
Oh, okay.
And when we were doing planning for the city, I had requested, and the city did it, was to put in various pieces of property into what I call dual use, which that it was actually first preference was whatever the water department needed, but that it could also be used by the recreation department. And that was one of the pieces of property that we were able to do that with. So we lost the property on Dixie Lane, and we deeded over 5 or 10 acres to the Housing Authority, and have gotten, comparatively speaking, very little in return for that swap. It did not go the way it was supposed to. Now, the Housing Authority is a separate entity of city government, so it's not like, it's a lost deal. It's what they do. What the city commissioners appoint the Housing Authority board, which operates the Housing Authority, but it is the Stewart Housing Authority with federal money in it. So it's kind of a joint effort in that. Those parks were there. We had, of course, Memorial Park, and many years back there was a need for the courthouse to expand on East Ocean Boulevard or 4th Street, and in doing so they were encroaching into the park, which upset many of the volunteer groups. They did not want to see parkland. They also had expansion to the sewer plant over there, the wastewater plant, and it upset a great deal of people. And the city and the county made a deal to purchase. There were homes on Georgia Avenue, and the homes on Georgia Avenue were right next to the shuffleboard club. So they purchased those homes and demolished them and gave the city that land in return for being able to build additionally onto the courthouse and expand out into the park.
So there were private homes kind of within Memorial Park?
Well, they were in the property that was made. They were there prior to it being made into Memorial Park. Now, that was accomplished, and that land swap was made. It still did not make the ladies very happy because they made some other expansions, and they finally said they were so unhappy that they were leaving, and they wound up purchasing Possum Lawn. And that was one of the things that did it, was that one of the expansions knocked down a slat house, so to speak, and potting area and so forth. And they felt like that anything that they did was subject to being moved by the city if they had to, or the county if they had to expand governmental facilities. So the ladies went off and purchased the Possum Lawn, and that's what the Nature Center is.
So probably Pink Hussey in that group.
Yes.
So Virginia Forrest maybe even.
Yes, Mrs. Forrest was very involved. She was the one who placed the eagle in the front of the Memorial Park. That eagle was placed there by her. Of course, that's when she was spearheading the drive nationwide, bringing attention to the plight of the eagle.
Wasn't it originally a bronze eagle, and didn't they? I mean, wasn't there something about the eagle being winged too?
No, to my knowledge, that particular one has always been the one that's
the concrete
there. Yes.
Now the water treatment plant was there quite some time ago, wasn't it? Right?
Yes, it's been expanded. The water treatment plant, and there used to also be the water plant was on the opposite side of the street, but as it grew, it moved down to 10th Street and Palm Beach Road. So it's there. But
so you've watched all that evolution.
I'm sorry.
I have this paper that Dr. Miniger wrote, and about how he spearheaded the movement to get Memorial Park. It was called 47-acre subdivision.
Yes.
And I guess those houses, it was a failed subdivision, so maybe they sold a few lots, and that's what those houses were.
That's
just
yes.
right there.
Actually, the original property went over where the pond is in front of the middle school. And even from what I've been told, I haven't seen these documents, even the log cabin that is now in Jensen Beach was on the property that was part of that original deal to get that.
That fits with what my research has been.
I used to have, if they didn't throw everything out after I left, I had a lot of that documentation at the Recreation Center.
I wonder where it is, because it surely would be helpful.
The files were there. As a matter of fact, I had a copy of every one of the comprehensive plans that the city of Stewart had put together. And to my knowledge, outside of Bob Green, the first one, he and I were the only ones that had it, because I took his and copied it. And I used to let people look at it, but I wouldn't let them go out of the building with it. I said, you can't leave with it. You have to look at it here.
And when you retired, they were just still there?
Yes, well, it was, it's all city documents, so,
And since they've done everything over again, I bet they are.
Well, a lot of times I think what happens is people look at something and they say, oh, look at this old thing. We don't need that anymore.
You should check it out. Maybe they did survive.
But we've had other parks. I don't know, were you interested in me going through all of these? Yes.
Everything that's in the city of Stuart.
And
of course, that was yours domain, right? So.
Yes. So then we had a hospital pond, which Mr. Ambler and I worked on together. And I had worked out a deal with the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission that they would give us fish to go in that pond, and also the very small one, which is called Lake Claire, which is on Palm Beach Road. So we would send a truck out to the turnpike, and they would drop off the turnpike, and they would give you fish. And if they saw that you were interested, as we were and always showed up, if someone along the line up further didn't get their fish, they would give us extra fish. So we developed that with the thought in mind that we would have a fishing area for children under 16 years of age. If you went there with your dad or your mom, that was all right, but they weren't allowed to go there without the child, so that it was supposed to be a child's domain. Then eventually, we had an opportunity, and I went to the city manager and asked him if I could use prison help. And he said yes. So we took on what we call the 7th Street Pond area. That was all overgrown woods, and there were some ponds used in there for controlling the water runoff around the city. And we cleaned that all up, and we developed that into a park, and we also put fish in that one. So then, as time went by, the commission allowed us to put little small fishing piers on this, and this was to enable people to be able to fish without the danger of sliding down the bank, and also we were becoming more aware of the fact that we had to give disabled people an opportunity to do things, and by having these little piers, then if you were on crutches or in a wheelchair or an elderly person or whatever, you'd have an opportunity to go. So we put fish into the ponds, and we had the platforms, and that was another one of the developments. And now we're getting into more recent years. We started looking at the fact that the city had various roads that were not developed, and many of them were roads that went to the river. So we thought we would try to make them little vest pocket parks. We would go in and use native materials. We would put a park bench, and while it was never completed, I had retired before we got that far, I wanted to have them tied together with distances so that people could walk, and they would be all marked out, and you'd have a destination. And it was to tell people you can exercise and do things without going to the gym or going into strenuous. It's good just to get out and take a nice brisk walk. And I had hoped as time went by that we would be able to put a water fountain in each one of these parks. And eventually ask the neighbors, get them involved to see if they would adopt it and take care of it. We would send the people around to empty the trash can and so forth, but to see if they would do this. So we did get several of the parks developed, and we did get some of the people to take care of them. And we also had the garden club donated some trees to us for one of the parks. And I'm not certain, I would say that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8 of these vest pocket parks that we had established at the end of streets. And it made it real nice because people were able to go down there and either see a sunset or just sit and look out at the water. eventually, as things went by,
Was there somebody who spearheaded that?
this was something that was talked about for quite a while. You know, different people had talked about it. The city had a rule at the time, it was an ordinance, that they would not dispose of any property that went to the waterway unless they had one of similar value given to them. So you might be able to swap it, but they did not want to just do away with it. And these vacant lots, I had seen them around quite a bit, and we were just putting like bush hog mowers in there, and they were always trash collectors. You know, people would throw weeds and branches and everything, and I thought, well, if they were developed, it would be nicer. But it was mentioned by different people over the years to do this, and so it caught on, and it was just to do little things like, for instance, Menninger Park. That is part of a roadway, and Nancy Saylor was instrumental in getting a lot of the donations by going to people that knew Mr. Manager as the flowering tree man. And so that park was developed, and I believe that her husband did all of the construction on the little gazebo that's there. But it was donated material here and there, and that's as I said, so many things like that were done. We had one at the...
Had they planned to close that street anyway? Is that...
Yes, that was what it... That's exactly what it was. The state reconfigured the intersections as they entered East Ocean Boulevard, because when they widened it, they felt they were going to increase speed, and they didn't want them going at unusual angles. So they reconfigured it at that, which left that piece of property there. So the city converted it to parkland. But also we have, like for instance, at the Kruger Creek Bridge there, we have a little small park on both sides of the bridge. And
it's covered.
Yes. Well, there's many of those things that are around, and it's kind of what makes Stewart unique, is all these little pockets of parks around. We think of Woodlawn, and that is on Colorado, right near the Confusion Corner intersection. It's on the west side of the tracks, or the south side, depending how you look at it. And that park had been there for a number of years. The old Red Cross building was in the park, and it sat there, and it didn't really do anything. And my theory was, when I was with the city, that we should never give away even a postage stamp size piece of property. And I offended people with that philosophy. But I had seen bigger cities that I had visited, and when they had these little small places, they were like gold nuggets. And if you give them to someone, then you're out there paying a tremendous amount of money trying to buy a single building lot. That was a classic example of it. It sat there for years, and of course we heard that, well, no one uses it. It's not anything. We said, well, if there's nothing there, people will not use it. And the Kiwanis Club came along and did a tremendous development in that park. And they were terrific people to work with. They came along and they did that, and the city built the restrooms. And if you go there, there are numerous people that use that park. And when you come into town and you drive through and you see these little places, similar right over the tracks as you would go in the direction of the ocean on East Ocean Boulevard, there is the bandstand that is there. Now that was also spearheaded by the Jeffersons, and Mr. Jefferson donated the plans for that. And of course that's a wonderful park that's been developed there. That was going to be a parking lot. I think that looks a little nicer than a parking lot. And there are afternoon concerts during the season that are held in that park. and many people enjoy it, and you can get yourself a sandwich at one of the many restaurants and come over there for an hour or so and be entertained. And so Stewart has a lot of very unique places like that. We have on the north side of the Roosevelt Bridge a couple of walkways that go down to the river. And people can go down and again have one of these little vest pocket parks. Now, one that I was hoping to see get developed, and it has kind of gone into limbo, was that we had a couple of street ends and a couple of lots that were put together, and they were just, if you look at US 1 as north and south, not going by direction, but by going by the road, it would be north of what used to be the Sons of Italy building. And those lots are there, and we had started to develop them when all of the construction and everything started. It was my hope that maybe the footprint underneath the bridge and maybe some swapping of land, which we could have put those street ends and the lots that we had together and put them up by the bridge, might have made another recreation area underneath the bridge in that area. But all in all, Stewart, I'm a bit sad because I almost think that we, and I don't almost think, my feeling is that we have gone backwards. That when a financial crunch came a while back, everyone was looking to where do we save money, and recreation and parks is somewhat looked at as icing on a cake. It's not looked at as something that is there for the good of the people and the well-being and the health of a community. Recreational programs are releases for people. They have a hard day, they come and they release. It's what makes them creative. In other words, they may not be able to make a living being an artist. They may not be, the projects that they make may not be something that they can sell, but it allows them to be creative. And it brings it out in the young people. It gives our senior people a opportunity to do things that are constructive and that they enjoy, and just sitting around and being with other people. So when you take and you look at the recreation, you look at our little theater groups, you look at our libraries, you just look at the volunteerism, whether you're going to Mott Memorial Hospital to be a volunteer, or you're being a mentor out at the school system for younger children. That is the glue of the community, is everyone being involved. But I don't see recreation and parks as some kind of an icing on the cake. I believe that it's necessary for the well-being of the community. For the mental health of the people, I think it's good. And for the creativity of people. Someone may have to go to work at a job that's a humdrum job every day because they have to make a living for their family. And they know that the things that they want to do creatively, they're not going to be able to bring money home. But they can do it in leisure hours through programs for personal enjoyment. And they can give them as gifts to people. They might even sell some of them. They may not make a living, but they have the satisfaction of saying, I did this and someone else thinks it's worthwhile. So basically, I think recreation and parks should be high on the list of things that are part of government.
That's the nice ending to the speech, but I want to ask you, I'm thinking about the clogging and the square dancing, and can you just kind of go through, you've mentioned some things, but there are more things that you haven't mentioned.
Oh,
too.
there's a tremendous amount. Dancing of all types. In other words, as you said, we had ballroom dancing, we had the clogging dancers, we had tap dancers.
Line dancing later.
Line dancing. In other words, whatever was we used to have the youth dancers for the young people and bring in, the live bands. we used to block off the street. The first street dance, to my knowledge, that we had was on Osceola, and I had gotten permission. Mr. Higbee, with the man who I told you was instrumental in me getting my position with the city. Bob Gottran was a friend of mine, and then I knew next door the Bartlett brothers. And so I asked them, I said, would you mind if I set up in front of your place of business on a weekend? And would you let me run electricity out? So we got a city truck and we put a band on it. We had outdoor dancing there.
You had danced it on the street before they thought they came up with it.
We got, with our seniors, I got one of the city rubbish trucks, big truck, and washed it all out in the afternoon and put straw in it, and we went to Fort Pierce. I had set it up with the recreation director up there that we could come up to them, and they had what was barn dancing, and it was anybody could do it, and ours was the more intricate dancing that we did in our square dancing. It was Western style, but we thought we would go up there, so we went up Indian River Drive, and on the way up I pulled off on this side street, and we had a converter, and we started up and we started dancing in the street up there, and everyone figured I knew everyone up there, and they were saying hello and going to the neighbors and all, and I couldn't convince them that I didn't know the people. And this was people like Bob Green from Green's dry goods store, and Charlie Foster and his wife, and the Bouses, and just people in the community that if they had called the police down because we were causing a ruckus, it wouldn't be believed who was there. But we also, with the young people, we set up to get an old farm tractor and wagons, and we put hay wagons, and I borrowed lights from the fire department to hang on this, and we took them down several times to Hope Sound, to their civic center, and we danced down there, and I would probably be locked up and put in jail for having such a vehicle on the road, but we could go almost all the way to Hope Sound and not pass another vehicle at all back then.
Like a tractor.
It was a tractor pulling hay wagons.
On US 1 or A1A?
No, on A1A, down A1A, and we had the portable lights hanging on the side of it, and the kids, I'd tell them, don't get off it, but they'd jump off and run and jump on another wagon and back and forth, and just many things.
Did anything ever backfire? Did you have an accident or something that you wish you hadn't done?
No, believe it or not, God must have been watching over. They say that watches over fools and drunks. I would say I was a fool, probably. And we didn't. As a matter of fact, I was very proud of the fact that in my entire career with the city, 33 years, we never had one lawsuit brought against us.
And we're so
that was successful.
Worry about liability now. It just cripples everything.
You can't do anything like we used to do. And I can remember getting permission from the city manager. Wednesday afternoon, everybody closed down. There was only downtown Stewart. You could have fired a cannon on Wednesday afternoon because everyone was closed. So I checked with Mr. Matherson over in Palm City. He had a pond over there. And I told him who I was, and I said that I was a certified lifeguard, and can I bring the kids over from the recreation center to swim in his pond? And he said, yes, you can, just make sure they don't throw papers and trash around. And so Wednesday afternoon, we would close the recreation center and take the kids swimming in the pond. I don't think the insurance company would care for that nowadays.
Nothing happened, no one drowned.
No. And we had fishing programs for the young people on Jack Eckertsley was wonderful about coming in, and he would teach the children about fishing, and then he would set it up with his senior group that they would take them out, and sometimes they would go on the bridge, and they would take them out to the ocean, and they would take them on boats, and they would teach them all about fishing.
So is this Dr. Eckersley's father?
His father, yes.
Now he is, I mean, one was a tremendous bridge player.
He, in fact, while he was doing the things with the youth, he was also teaching bridge. And after I retired, I went to the recreation center, and just about no less than 5 minutes before I walked in, Jack had passed out in the bridge program and passed away. And
what a way to go.
Yes, doing what he loved to do. And he would come, he loved to play the harmonica. And he would come at the holidays and he would play Christmas music with his harmonica. The first senior group that got started in Martin County was started at our recreation center. And what it was, I believe it was President Carter put a program on where he wanted to hear from the seniors. And they came and they started saying they wanted this and they wanted that and they wanted the other thing, and they were giving all these suggestions. And when they were through, I asked if I could speak, and they said yes. And I said, all the recreation things, I said, we can do for you next week. And they looked at me and they said, what? I said, yeah, you want to come back next week? Wednesday afternoons we had our senior group, and it started right up from that, and it went for years. And now, of course, it's relocated. It's over in Jensen Beach at the log cabin, which was specifically built for them.
You started that?
Yes.
From that? Will you run that by me again? Explain what was it that, what kind of...
The president was gathering information on what seniors would like to do. And so they had one of these information gathering meetings at the recreation center on Flagler.
President of the United States.
The President of the United States.
Okay.
And I believe it was Jimmy Carter, but I'm not absolutely positive of that. And at any rate, from that, this information was being gathered, and most of the things that they were talking about, not most, but a good portion of them, was all recreation oriented. And so I told them that we could do that. So we started the very next, it was a Wednesday meeting, and I said, well, come on back next Wednesday. And it went from there, and it went for years and years and years.
Did you follow the log cabin thing with it being dismantled and rebuilt? Tell me about what you remember about
yes,
that.
The log cabin was, it had gotten too small for the use of the school system. And they were looking to get rid of it. And they were just about to demolish it and do away with it when Les Combs, who was the owner of the local radio station, said no, he wanted to preserve it. And he went over there and drew prints and put some kind of markings on each of the logs so that it could be reassembled. And it was in storage for a number of years. And a federal program came along that would restore historical buildings or of historical value. And a move was made to do that. And the money was accepted. And the place that they found that they were able to do it was at Jensen Beach at Langford Park. And then a local contractor, Vince Bocchino, was, I don't know whether he was in the contracting business or was hired as an individual, and he headed up the reconstruction of the log cabin, which now stands in Langford Park.
Very used. Do you feel kind of sad that didn't stay in Stewart?
Well, I didn't, at the time, we really didn't have a place for it. That was the unfortunate part. In other words, we have Memorial Park, which is not a very large park. And that would have been the only place that at that time we had that it would be able to go into. And then if you did a building like that, along with it, you need parking. So it would have just taken so much of it. It would have been nice if, for instance, the landfill, which I had also requested that be turned into dual use, And so the landfill out on Monterey Road was also supposed to be used for recreational purposes. Now, had we had that at the time, that would have been a very large place and something that could have been placed out there. As it so happened, recreation is going out there, but it's not public recreation. It's being leased for a golf course. So it is, while it will be used for what we said as far as dual use and recreation, and we do have to look for partnership and things of that nature. At the time, I had hoped that we would have been able to develop a place to fly model airplanes, and there were some lakes, and have remote controlled boats and places where people could run the little remote controlled cars, a number of things like that. I thought that would have been a nice park for it. The commission decided they wanted to do some of the other to produce revenue as well with it.
Do people have to go to Port St. Lucie to run those little things? I mean,
I don't.
Maybe the high school or something.
Yeah, I don't know right now where they had one in Hobe Sound for a while, which I think closed. And I had gone to one in White City where it was the small cars, and they did have a club that was out at the Witham Field. I don't know as much traffic as they're getting out of there with regular airplanes, whether they allow them to go out in that area or not. So I'm not aware of any sites for those types of programs right now.
Jump back to 10th Street, and you were telling me something about HRS, and can you remember what we?
Yes, you were asking about HRS, and it's not on 10th Street.
7th Street.
It's on 7th Street. Yes. Now that had nothing to do with the city at all, but there are two facilities that there. One is in the old post office building, which was between A1A and Colorado Avenue in that section. And then the other HRS building, that is the one that's down right across from the Stewart Police and Fire Station, which is closer to the Palm Beach Road. And that now is known as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. That is also the same street that has the pond, what we call 7th Street Ponds Park, but of course it had no official name to it.
But you worked on that, right?
Yes,
okay.
I did.
And because a lot of people refer to that as the Blue Pond, from their childhood. It's so hard to believe how they could call it Blue Pond. Did there seem to be a spring associated with that or anything?
I really couldn't tell you, and I am not certain. I would say the pond that they're talking about is gone. And that was the one that would be where Mr. Gary's commercial stores are. There was a pond there.
Okay, and they filled it in.
And I believe that one there is filled in, and that's the one they used to swim in, because I was told about it by numerous people that the parents didn't like them doing it, and the boys had sneaked down there and swim in it.
So that's good to clear up with me, because I see all that water in the aerials of that time, and of course I couldn't tell which watery place would be their blue hole, so it's good that you have that oral history, that you know that is no longer, it's not the ones that remain. It was more where.
But that's what I was told the boys swam in. No, I didn't actually see it, but that's what I was told. That's what promoted, and I think that Felix Williams was one of the key people in it. He kept saying that we need to have a community swimming pool. And it was because the boys kept going down, young fellas, and swimming in these ponds, which most people thought that they were going to go swimming down there and drown, and no one would ever find them. But there was a community effort. Of course, it was picked up and as time went by, there was total integration of everything, and instead of being a swimming pool for East Stewart, it was decided to place it out at the high school. And if I am not mistaken, the Kiwanis headed up the last drive on that, taking the funds that had been collected over the years, and was placed out there so that the supervision and control of it would be under the school system, and they would be able to have all of the children participate in swimming programs, and then after hours, other groups such as Red Cross or whatever would be able to have swimming classes, and then even open swimming for the entire community, where like in the summer months, the county would assist them in paying for lifeguards and things of that nature.
And it seemed to have worked out pretty well, didn't it?
Yes, I think that we have to realize all the water that we have around here, and for instance, when I took my lifeguard instruction, I went down to the Sunrise Inn, and we were able to use their pool, but there were no major pools in the area, so you either went and swam in the South Fork of the river or something of that nature. Well, to try and give classes and something like that was just not possible. So they would contact some of the private places and try and do it. The Pelican, I think they allowed them to use it a couple of times over there for classes as well.
Which makes me think of the JCs and the silly things they used to do. I mean, like that, they'd have the men dressed up in a beauty contest when I first came to town. I mean, what we did to entertain ourselves.
The JCs sponsored the runner-up to the Miss America contest, and I think it was the Miss Florida first.
Oh, a real beauty contest. These were men dressing up.
Right, but they did that, and they did it over at the Pelican Pool. And of course, that was a very exclusive at that time facility, and to be able to have activities like that there were really quite interesting.
How long have you lived? I'm jumping to Souls Point now. How long have you lived here on Souls Point?
I would say something like 37 years. When I first came to Sewell's Point, there were
1962.
Yes, there were maybe 10 or 12 homes south of where I was at. On roughly a half a mile down from Town Hall, and then beyond that, there were maybe a dozen homes or so. And just prior to me moving here, a few years before that, of course, the new bridges went in. So therefore, if you lived on Sewell's Point prior to that, you went through Jensen Beach, which was quite a long hike. And when we first came to Sewell's Point, my wife had trouble in the summer times in 12 o'clock noon trying to hang clothes out for the mosquitoes. So it was before the development of Hutchinson Island. Each night the breeze would blow across and bring the mosquitoes and the sandflies, and the next day they were hiding in all of your bushes and they would come out, so it was brutal.
Did you regret moving out here for a while?
No. I could tell you something funny there. I worked for the city, and I thought, well, I ought to live in the city limits, but the housing in Stewart was too expensive. I had to move out here and buy a house because it was more reasonable.
Isn't that funny? And now they talk about Sewell's Point's exclusive community.
I had an old Model A Ford that I used to take a boys club out, and that met at the recreation center as well. It was the Junior Conservation Club. And I had a hole drilled in the exhaust system, and I had a pipe inserted, and I used to go down to Mark Witham, and he would give me the chemical that the people used. And after he saw that my system worked very good, and that I was willing to go around and not only fog around my house but my neighbors. He would give me more of the material than anyone else because he knew. He says, now you'll be fogging the whole neighborhood? Yep, I will. And so I used to do my little niche down there, and everybody loved my old Model A Ford, and the mosquito people liked me for doing it too.
Explain how you hooked it up again.
You would take the exhaust manifold, which was very hot, and you would drill a hole in it and then put a pipe in it and then a valve on the pipe. And then you would take a gallon or larger container, and you would have a pipe running out of the bottom of that with a hose, and you'd hook it up. And when you open the valve, it would allow this material, which was had a diesel base to it, and then the chemical mixed in it, it would go in and it would burn on the manifold. And if you recall the old mosquito trucks, how they fogged so much, well, that's exactly what this thing would do. And it would fog like crazy and cover the whole neighborhood up with this smoke and drive off the mosquitoes.
How did you know how to do that?
Well, I just asked people, and of course the mixing of the chemical and everything was done by the county mosquito control. And back then it was a very rural area, and they would get a lot more complaints than they could ever handle. They couldn't get around. They didn't have enough people and employees. And when the director of the mosquito group, Mark Witham, saw that I had an outfit that really put it out, and that I didn't mind helping my neighbors, he would give it to me in 5-gallon buckets, and then I could take care of this neighborhood. And he didn't get any complaints from around here.
Isn't that something? That's so kind of something. The Men's Garden Club.
Yes, the Men's Garden Club was really a conservation type organization. You take Ewing and people like that were in there, and while they did the Fishnik and it was out there to publicize and to give them a little bit of money, more of their things were done behind the scenes. But they donated money, just like the Women's Garden Club and the Women's Club and all of these other organizations. They donated money for the good of the organizations. Now, I spoke earlier about the Junior Women's Club and how helpful they were with the recreation. Well, they had an age limit on that, and then they bumped it a little bit higher, but eventually those women are gone. Most of them became back then seroptimists, and I don't know what they are now. But we don't have our younger people getting involved.
Well, they do have Junior League. They have these things, but it's a little bit more social and prestige type thing than just genuinely.
I'm talking about the people that want to get down in the dirt and do something. Someone who wants to really work and not just say, okay, we're going to give a couple of dollars for it, but get involved. I remember when we were working at Shepherd Park, and we were having a cleanup and everything, and I asked they don't like to be called the Women's Garden Club, but it is the Garden Club, and they're all women. And they were over there in the park pulling weeds and everything, and we were having the biggest laugh because all of them were saying how they had gardeners to take care of their own property. And here they were over there, and they're pulling up old cans and trash and weeds and spreading mulch and doing all the things and chuckling and having the greatest time doing it. And the majority of these ladies were of retirement age. But all kinds of things like that, but it's that people were giving, and that's something I think we have to keep instilling in people, that we have to give. We have to, if you're going to have a community, you have to give back to it. You can't just take and look, well, what's in it for me? And that's some of the things that I would hope that our smaller town atmosphere would keep. Although I do see some of the organizations, like the Junior Women's Club, is gone. You don't hardly hear anything about the JCs. I mean, I remember when I was a young man in the JCs, and then finally they awarded me Man of the Year, And I thought, well, that was that was just such an honor to me.
Oh, it was a big, big thing.
Yes.
The JCs really were. They were.
And as I say, the women's club, they were all over the place. The present Christmas parade that we had was run by them for years.
And now it's this Optimus they're doing it.
Well, I think it's the Seroptimus.
It might be some of the same people.
It is the same people, and it goes on. So a lot of that, it's a shame that those things left.
I want to. Okay.
The one at the end of Colorado, we're talking about the Vest Pocket Parks, and we decided, well, we would let people donate trees and anything they want. So we had a motorcycle club come to us, and they wanted to know if they could donate a tree and some things, would they be allowed to put a plaque on it? And what my thought of in a plaque was something, like about a 5x7 or something like that, and mounting it on a piece of wood and saying, tree dedicated to so-and-so or whatever it was. Well, lo and behold, I asked the park superintendent that I had that was working at the time, I said, Brian, work with these folks. Well, they said, well, can we make it a little nicer? Can we make it out of stone? He said, oh, yes. Well, it wound up, they brought something down there that looked exactly like a headstone. And it's, I don't know exactly what's written on it, like Big Charlie, we hope you ride in the sky forever or something.
I think there was an article in the paper on that recently about the motorcycle man that got killed.
And so we had people calling us up wanting to know if somebody was in fact buried there.
Oh.
So some of the ideas that we had for people to develop, like for instance, the original little garden areas that you see in the downtown parking area, we were attempting to get people to adopt it so that you would put on there, it was, and one of the people that did it was Houston's. And it was adopted by Houston's Office Supply, and a little small sign went on that. That meant that they would weed it and take care of it, and so forth. And the Jeffersons, they took one when they had, Peter had his architectural office down there, and so they had one. But we did have unusual things go because someone called me up and told me that they said, have you been looking at them? I said, yes, they have. They said, well, have you noticed what's growing in the one by what used to be the old Florida Parent Lake? And someone had planted a marijuana bush in it. So in the middle of downtown Stewart, we had a marijuana bush growing in our planter.
Oh, you mean right there by the post office arcade?
Yes.
Right downtown.
Right downtown. It was growing there. So then we were afraid that if we pulled it out, we would now be in possession of a marijuana plant.
And it truly was one.
It truly was one. And finally we ripped it out and got rid of it and ran our chances that we didn't get caught by the police department with this in our possession.